Farbood, thank you so much for joining me. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while now, and I'm very excited to talk to you because I really admire some of the things you're doing.
Feelings mutual.
You recently became one of the first 200 people in the world to receive Follistatin gene therapy. Firstly, how does that feel like?
Uh, Pretty remarkable. I've been biohacking and working on health and longevity for probably 25 years now, and um, I've done just about everything. And I could probably say that in terms of a single intervention having the biggest impact, this might be number one.
Wow, interesting. What got you started 25 years ago?
Uh, Honestly, it was Ray Kurzweil's Fantastic Voyage. The book came out like 20 years ago. So let's see, that was my late 20s. I started a few years before that. So in my early 20s, I started studying macrobiotics, which is the traditional dietary practices of Japanese Zen Buddhist monks. It's really hardcore when it comes to dietary practices. I mean, it's a whole philosophy of life and reality. If you want to dig into Japanese Zen Buddhism, and it extends through everything in life and lifestyle. And for example, and this is about 25 years ago now. One of the things they're really big on is probiotics, right? And like probably the number one thing that they think is important in terms of health is your gut health. And over the years, so many of the things that when I would talk to friends and family about macrobiotics, they'd kind of laugh and think it was maybe quackery or some weird hippie thing, and then 10 years later, all anybody's talking about is probiotics. Uh, you know, so I was really, really into that, like strict macrobiotic for almost 10 years. And I actually talked with Brian Johnson a little bit about this because I think he sort of inadvertently ended up on a very similar dietary practice. And when I saw him in Honduras, where I actually got my Follistatin shot, I was like, I don't know if you know this, but you basically eat macrobiotically. And it has this really crazy effect on you when you do it basically 100% of the time. And the way I describe it is I don't really, um, it made me a human for the first time. It made
Interesting.
me feel and know what it's like to be the human animal, because you really develop this very direct connection, to the kindergarten uh, aphorism of "you are what you eat."
Hmm.
Uh, and you really, really get to know that more intimately than at any other point. And, to kind of speak to another, I think, way that he thinks about it that I like is you're really surrendering yourself to the algorithm. Instead of, the way I talk about it is that, being an adult for many people is just like it's licensed to act like a child. Uh, you just eat what you want, you sleep when you want, you drink if you want, you exercise if you want. It's just whatever you want. And if you think about it, our language always betrays us. And so when people are hungry, what do they ask themselves? They say, "What am I in the mood for?" Well,
Hmm.
okay. I mean, if you ask what you're in the mood for, you're often not going to get to something that's necessarily that good for you. And so when we kind of went hardcore, and I say we, me and a few friends who were living together, we were all studying it and practicing it together and cooking, 3 macrobiotic meals a day, grinding gamasio, which is, sesame seeds and sea salt in a traditional ceramic suribachi with a wooden pestle, making our own pickles and sauerkraut and things like that. You're really surrendering yourself to the algorithm of what to eat and how to live. And that had a really profound change on me. And then, like I said, Ray Kurzweil's book came out. And I think, the number that he says in there, he's like, if you're 30 years old now, so for me, I was just kind of under 30 years old at the time, you might just make the cusp of, the escape velocity of life. And so I'm like, okay, I got a chance here. I'm gonna go hardcore on this. So started doing blood work, optimizing my blood markers like vitamin D and testosterone. I was like literally vitamin D, like nutritionally deficient. I'm dark skinned. When I found that out, I'd been living in San Francisco, so dark skin living in San Francisco, not a good recipe for vitamin D levels. Started taking supplements, was always eating right, started seeing a trainer. I started doing peptides maybe 6 years ago or something like that.
It's early.
I did my whole genome 12 years ago, when it was still like prohibitively expensive to do your whole genome. And we sat there and wrote some software to correlate your genome with SNpedia. SNpedia is like Wikipedia for SNPs, where they basically pull the research around all the different SNPs and see what we know about what different parts of our genome, right? So I've been geeking out on this stuff pretty hard for a long time.
Wow, that's fantastic. And that's like, peptides even right now seem very early, and 6 years ago, I can only guess how early that was.
Again, people were laughing at me, telling me I'm going to kill myself, telling me, like, I don't buy the peptides on the dark web. I get them through a doctor, through compounding pharmacies. But they were pretty early a while ago. I've also learned an incredible amount. I like to give respect to the people who I've learned a ton from. Ben Greenfield, who's generally been ahead of the game on most of these things. He's also, like Brian, is a really wonderful human being. And then over the past few years, I've gotten to know Dr. Sandra Kaufman, who wrote the Kaufman Protocol, which are 2 books where she basically developed a scoring and numbering system for all the different supplements and things like that. And she rates them on a scale of 0 to 3 on, I think, across 7 different vectors or tenets that she calls them, like, their impact on your mitochondria or your DNA or your waste management cellular waste management systems. And they get a higher score if there's more, as it sort of climbs up the research ladder of, is it theoretically good? Is it good in like a cellular model? Is it good in an animal model? And is it good in a human model? So I've learned a lot from her as well. And I sort of take all these things and create my own protocol out of them.
Yeah, that brings me to your recent follistatin gene therapy. For our listeners who may not be aware, could you please explain what follistatin gene therapy is and what it aims to achieve?
Sure. Yeah. So the folks at MiniCircle, and the reason they call it MiniCircle is because there are MiniCircle uses plasmids. So plasmids are basically naked bits of DNA, and we've known about plasmids for like 100 years. And then I want to say, I think in the 70s or so, they started realizing. See, the thing with plasmids is they're naked bits of DNA, so your body breaks them down very quickly. So not a great vector for therapy because your body breaks it down so quickly, which is why so much gene therapy has been focused on AAVs, viral vectors, right? But we later learned that you could structure plasmids in a circle, hence MiniCircle. And this provides some stability to the plasmid. And then also MiniCircle, learned that you could bind it to albumin, which gives it more stability. And so what they're doing is they're not genetically modifying you, they're genetically modifying the plasmids, although we're basically at the point of where we're starting to genetically modify people, which is very, very cool too, and sign me up for that. So they genetically modify the plasmid to essentially code for whatever protein they want, in this case, follistatin. They also genetically modify the plasmid to have a kill switch, which is part of what's really cool about their therapies. You can turn it off with a round of tetracycline. So they modify these plasmids, they inject them locally into you. Mine's in my right shoulder. They stay basically local. So that's why I describe it as a mini factory. I've got a mini factory of plasmids that are using my own cellular machinery to create follistatin. And then it crosses the cell membrane into your blood. So it's constantly, this little mini factory in my arm is constantly pumping follistatin into my blood for the next 1.5 to 2 years, maybe a little longer. It depends on the person.
Interesting. So just 5 days ago, I think you ran a Twitter poll asking if you should get a second shot of follistatin just to show it's safe. But you just said, it's pumping pumping the therapy into you into your blood for a few years now. So why are you considering a second shot right now?
Well, I don't think they're overdosing you. I think they're probably underdosing you a little bit. They don't want to create side effects. I think you can take more. And I just want to show that it's actually quite safe. You can take a double dose and you're not going to see any negative results. So my plan is to track one of the things that they saw it do in their study was reduce people's epigenetic age an average of 7 years. If you were over 61, it reduced your epigenetic age an average of 12 years. So what I'd like to do is see if this reduces my epigenetic age, right? And then see again that it doesn't reduce it further. So it kind of achieves this sort of baseline. And then see if a second shot will reduce it even further, to kind of see whether you can get more epigenetic age reduction by taking a couple of shots. That's kind of the way I'm thinking about it.
Yeah. Let's talk about the changes you've experienced since taking follistatin. Were there any specific results or biomarkers that surprised you or stood out?
So, I'm on a protocol of things, and, I wish I was, in some ways, I wish I was just doing the follistatin, but, the main reason I'm doing this is for my own health. So I don't want to just be a guinea pig for, although I am fully guinea pigging myself on a whole bunch of things. So, I'm on follistatin, gene therapy. I'm also taking peptides right now. I'm going to cycle them off here shortly because I don't take them 365 days a year. I'm also currently on enclomiphene. Enclomiphene tells your body to generate more testosterone. So it's not exogenous testosterone. It's telling your pituitary gland to generate more FSH, and for men that ends up, you create more of your own testosterone. But I was doing those before the follistatin gene therapy as well. And like I said, I've been doing both of those for 6-7 years. And my markers have been quite good. Since the follistatin, I've seen some pretty crazy changes physiologically. My DEXA scan over 24 days saw a 3.7 pound decrease in fat and a 3.7 pound increase in muscle, which is pretty nutty for 24 days. Not something that's normal that you normally see with just a little bit of enclomiphene and some peptides. I actually don't dose that heavily on the peptides. Some people, like one of them that I take is tesamorelin. Some people take like a literal gram of it a day. I'm taking, I think, something like, I don't know, 20 times less than that, or maybe even more or less than that. So I'm not taking a ton of that stuff. So, I wouldn't expect to, I don't know, like I said, I was doing those before and I wasn't gaining almost 4 pounds of muscle in 24 days. So that was a pretty big one. I also saw a massive drop in my LDL cholesterol. I've also really been eating really well. Earlier this year, I've always been very skinny or muscular, and somehow last year, for the first time in my life, I got what I would just describe as fat, and it was probably a combination of age and lifestyle. And I had a gut, like I could hold my gut in my hand, and I'd never experienced that. So at the beginning of this, and I think for some reason the holidays put that extra 2 pounds on, that just made it really, and I think also because I worked out for so many years with a trainer that it looked a little bit better on me, and so it kind of was hidden. The fat was kind of I didn't look that bad, but then it hit this couple extra pounds where I'm like, no, this is not a good look. I'm not down for this. I was close to 200 pounds. And so I'm like, okay, time for evasive maneuvers. So at the beginning of the year, I got back on the peptides, on the enclomiphene, and I started taking tirzepatide, which is the peptide that is Mounjaro, the new Ozempic. It's generally better than Ozempic, and there's already some new cooler stuff coming out. So tirzepatide had a big impact because tirzepatide basically kills your appetite. And for me, it had this strange effect of making me feel like I was doing macrobiotics again, because macrobiotics is like a real caloric deficit. In general, it's tough to just consume that much plant matter. It's almost vegan with a little bit of fish. And so I really started losing a bunch of weight from the tirzepatide, and it really killed my appetite. So that's kind of continued. I'm not taking the tirzepatide anymore, but for some reason, the follistatin is kind of giving me that effect as well. And so my diet is pretty much steak, fruit, greens, and fermented food.
Hmm.
I'm currently still doing a caloric deficit, but that'll change once I kind of lose another maybe 5% body fat.
Yeah. I think a lot of people wouldn't try anything new that isn't FDA approved or doesn't have a stamp of authority that says so-and-so drug is safe and you should take it. So I'm curious about your reasoning when you were considering follistatin and all these other things that you just mentioned. How do you assess the potential upside versus the downside risk?
Yeah, so most of the things I'm doing, I'm not the first person in the world to do it, and I don't mind being the first person in the world to do it. I'm trying to join the study for Minicircle's next therapy called Clotho, so maybe I'll be the literal first person in the world to do that, or hopefully maybe the first 10 people in the world doing it. I'll take follistatin, for example. The reason they picked follistatin is people have been injecting follistatin for decades. Bodybuilders in particular. And because your body metabolizes it so quickly, like most peptides, you end up injecting it daily, right? And so people have pretty much safely been injecting follistatin for decades without major effects. There's not necessarily zero effects or zero downsides, but people aren't falling over dead from it because they took an injection of follistatin. So, Minicircle is not incentivized to kill people. they're, they're incentivized to do things that help people. So I like the incentive structure there, right? Show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. Then people have been taking follistatin for decades. Then on top of that, there's a kill switch. On top of that, Brian Johnson, for example, has had it. He did a lot of diligence and vetting on its safety. So I don't think it sounds crazy to do. I don't think I'm doing anything super risky. And if there's some negative effect, and here's the other thing, I'm testing my markers and things very regularly. If I'm doing enclomiphene, which is increasing my FSH, increasing my testosterone, I'm testing about once a month. I'm doing a full blood panel, like a massive blood panel, 40, 50 different things. So I think there's a way of doing things responsibly. And that's how I try to do it. So I don't actually think it's a crazy risk. And just because a certain body approves or doesn't approve something doesn't determine whether it's a risk or not. And, if I wasn't doing all the, when I was 44 years old, my epigenetic age was 39. I don't think it would have been that if I was not doing all the things I've been doing for the past 20 years or so. So I'm trying to keep myself alive, I think it's Hippocrates who said, patient, or depending on your translation, doctor, heal thyself. You're responsible for taking care of yourself. Organizations like the FDA are a great way of keeping us from just having complete quackery on the market that is just literally killing people. But you have to, the FDA is not, its job is not to keep you alive and healthy. It's to keep you from dying unnecessarily because people are doing things that are definitively unsafe, dangerous, and bad. And that's what they're pretty good at,
Yeah. Sorry, just about the incentive structure with the FDA. I'm curious to see if you think that's a problem in that area specifically.
Look, I think, thank God for the FDA. I would not want to live in a world where there was no FDA. I think it's crazy to suggest that we don't want an organization that is, validating stuff, because there's so many things coming on the market. And in the case of Follistatin gene therapy, I did a lot of my own research. Other people like Brian Johnson did a lot of their own research. We can't do that for 1,000 different things, right? So just because there's one thing where I'm doing a ton of research and I feel like it's safe, and maybe the FDA hasn't gotten to it yet, it certainly doesn't mean I don't want the FDA doing what they're doing for everything else. It's a team effort, and I mean, yeah, thank God they're doing what they're doing.
So you mentioned the kill switch for follistatin. Can you please expand on what that is and how it works?
Yeah, so part of the part of the genetics of the plasmids that they created responds to antibiotics. So a round of tetracycline will basically take get rid of the plasmids that are in you.
I think it's amazing that special economic zones or startup cities like Próspera are aiming to accelerate longevity and human prosperity, and that the people there aren't afraid to experiment with new treatments, and they're following a proactionary rather than a precautionary principle. I'm curious, after having visited yourself, what do you think about Próspera and what it offers?
I mean, it's awesome. The people there are awesome. Their mission is awesome. They've been doing it for a while. They're not new. I think they've been around 10 to 15 years or something like that. I'm a big fan of Balaji. He's a good friend. He's really been obviously pushing the network state worldview. I think a couple days ago, or maybe literally yesterday, Brian Johnson, sort of dropped his work on network state for Don't Die. I've been talking to him about that recently as well. Big proponent of that. I'm ready to buy some land on the in the Don't Die network state. And that's how this country was started. This country being the United States of America. It was started by people who were essentially doing their own network state, right? And that's what we should be doing. The goal of humanity is not to give up and hand ourselves over to some organization to rule over us. We are that organization, and it's incumbent on us to continue to push that vision forward and continue to redefine it, all within the rule of law. Without the rule of law, we can't have civilization. So if we want to have civilization fall apart and rebuild it, well, that doesn't seem to me like the ideal way of going about improving things, because who knows if you can rebuild it after it falls apart. But I think there are mechanisms to do things within the law and within the system, like finding a place like Rotan where they're okay with you developing a new economic zone. And a lot of this stuff has been figured out. I think it was, if I remember correctly, if it was Dubai, where they essentially went and got the judges from the UK to come there and help them develop all the rules and laws around how to make this special economic zone, because the United Kingdom has incredibly sophisticated, couple 100-year track record of laws around sophisticated economic principles. And so instead of just, making that stuff up from the ground up, they said, hey, we don't have this system ourselves here. Why don't we go and find a group that has already thought through and codified the best rules for how to engage in a different type of economic, legislation and organization and rule set. So I think that's a great means of continuing to do that.
Why do you think so many people are sort of resistant to the idea of a longer life? And I'm also curious to hear your broader philosophical case for why you want to live longer, or perhaps forever.
This is a great one, and you really do get into interesting. I don't know if you're an EAC guy.
Yeah, I mean,
but
yeah, I vibe with it. I don't agree with all of the things, but yeah, I'm like kind of in the techno
Okay, let's
optimist
get
camp.
into it. What don't you agree with?
Okay. Well, so I think
You
it
don't
tends
have
to.
David Deutsch hiding in the corner there to come help you with your epistemology, do you? Because that's not fair.
I don't, but I think yeah, I share a similar view to his on EAC. Um, it, some of it seems to have like this sort of inevitability baked into it, which is like um, that it's not just about possibility. It's like we will inevitably make things better, and that's where like I tend to disagree. I think yes, improvement is possible and it's desirable, and we should go ahead and do it. But I don't think there's any sort of inevitability to those improvements.
Where do you get that's actually new to me. I'd never pulled the sort of inevitability
Yeah,
vector out of it. Where
I
do you
think
get that from?
like
Out of
some of
curiosity.
yeah some of the arguments I've heard like Beth make, especially like from thermodynamics. Um, I think like
Oh,
um,
he's like, this is the inevitable conclusion,
yeah,
result. This is the
yeah,
inevitability of the thermodynamic path that we are on.
right,
This is our destiny.
sort of, yeah, and like
Interesting.
I'm
Yeah.
totally about
Okay.
like the techno optimist thing, and like I think we should make progress and accelerate in all these areas, and I think it's a really worthy goal. And obviously, I love the memes, and that's something I love on
Here
Twitter.
for the memes. We're
Yeah,
here for
here
the
for the
memes.
memes, here for the vibe.
Yeah.
The people are
I mean, I think
amazing.
I think I don't mean to put words in his mouth. But my sense is that he's speaking more about that. This is the this is the trend. I don't think he thinks it's necessarily inevitable, because if it was, then why would he be trying to mimetically push it, right?
Hmm.
Um, so to me, if it was truly inevitable, he wouldn't need to have ever mentioned it or brought it up or continue to ring the
Right.
bell on it. I think maybe what he means more is that, hey, this is, if you look at the history, we've been doing this. There is a trend here. Let's stay on it.
Hmm.
Um, it isn't inevitable. We have to
Right.
actually stay on it.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to be pedantic or
Yeah.
nitpick your arguments. I find it really interesting that you brought that up, because I'm always trying to kind of learn what people think about that, and it kind of relates. I bring it up because of your question around longevity, because I think they're actually highly related things. I was speaking to somebody in SF the other day, and they're like, "Oh, you're an EAC person." I'm like, "Yeah, you're not," because it's just kind of like, "What do you? Then what are you? You're either EAC or you're D-cell. Pick a side, okay?" and he's like, "No, I just I don't think we should just. There's got to be some. It can't just be the fastest thing ever." It's like, okay, well then, where do we stop? Like people,
Yeah.
I don't know, like I get driven a little bit mad pretty quickly when someone's argumentation and epistemology devolves to what I basically qualify as witch hunting. And it's like, okay, then your argument against it is that we shouldn't go too fast. Well, it's like, to me, what's beautiful about the idea of effective altruism, not altruism, like, to bleep with effective altruism, effective accelerationism, is that the word effective is there. It's a sort of naturally self-limiting word. Because people sort of argue like, well, we could kill ourselves with it. And it's like, well, that would kind of violate the word effective. Okay. Like,
Yeah.
so it's silly to argue that effective accelerationism is arguing in favor of doing things that kill us, because it violates the point of it being effective.
Yeah.
And that's why I sort of love it intellectually and epistemologically, is because it has this sort of self-regulation built into it. If
Hmm.
it's not effective acceleration, then we shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
Let's do the effective stuff, the stuff that works. So going back to your question about, why live forever, again, people get caught up in this in a bunch of different ways. Forget about living forever. Living forever is the result. Better yet, answer the question to me: when do you want to start suffering miserably and until you're dead?
Hmm.
What's the answer? When do you want to do that?
Never.
Okay,
I
so
heard.
the result of you never suffering miserably until you're dead is that you just live forever.
Right.
Okay, and so maybe you do want to live forever. That's okay too, in my opinion. Um, and possibly there are some people who don't want to live forever. That I understand. But I don't think there is anyone who wants to suffer miserably from a decaying, dissolving, degenerating body and mind. Nobody wants that.
Yeah.
So if you avoid that indefinitely, you'll probably just be alive indefinitely until some accident, takes you out.
Yeah.
I've
And
I've suffered a lot physically in my life. I have half a kidney on my right side. I have 6 inches of less intestine in me. I have titanium stapes for bones in my ears. I have a screw in this wrist. I've probably gotten to a bunch of things I've forgotten about. I've got titanium in my jaw. Um, I know what it's like to spend almost a year of my life unable to stand up straight, unable to really walk unassisted, essentially to be an old man. And it is not fun. You don't want it. And nobody who's experiencing that argues that, no, we shouldn't live forever. I don't want to live forever. I prefer to be unable to walk and just be in constant pain and misery. It just doesn't make basic sense. Doesn't pass the sniff test.
yeah, that's an interesting argument. I actually haven't heard that made a lot of times before. It's like, um, I know Brian Johnson had an interesting one, and when I shared it with a few friends, they were like, "Yeah, that sort of makes sense." He basically said that, he basically asked, "Do you want to live tomorrow?" And the person would say, "Yes." And Brian just like sort of extends that to like saying, I don't think there's a single person who would not answer that question. Yes,
Yeah.
like
What day do you not want to live
yeah,
tomorrow?
exactly. What day do you not want to live tomorrow? So yeah, that was like an interesting way of framing it as well. I don't know if like framing things like forever and like immortal life is like good to sort of spread or promote these ideas, because like um, people do have like a very strong connotation with those terms, and it can seem
They
like
get real riled up about it.
yeah, exactly, and it doesn't make sense to me, like logically. If you like sort of question a few other things, and you'll sort of reach there. But yeah, there are different ways um, to sort of talk about these ideas. I think.
Yeah, and
Uh,
to your point, I think whether you phrase it from the perspective of not suffering or not being dead tomorrow, uh, it it checks out in
yeah,
all of these ways, which is a good. It's it doesn't the end result is still don't die.
yeah. Well,
There's
we
got to
just
be
talked.
some sort of epistemological aphorism applicable here. I'll ask my brother or
Maybe,
David.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
My claim to physics fame is Deutsch replied to a tweet of mine, a physics tweet of mine, and it took me forever to figure out. I don't know why, but it was really strange that he did it. That he did it all. But eventually, I'm like, oh, I think because the point that I made was sort of both physical and epistemological, and I think that's where he really gets the blood flowing.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Well, we just talked about EAC. Let's talk about effective altruism. You have a tweet where, which I really like, and you say the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are "I'm an effective altruist and I'm here to help." Obviously, a play on Ronald Reagan's quote. Um, why is effective altruism so dangerous in your mind? And we can talk about the better
you know,
alternative, EAC.
part of why I glommed onto EAC, I think, so early and vociferously is because I've always been so sort of turned off by effective altruism. And, you know, even like 5, 6 years ago, I'm like, what is this obnoxious holier than thou art worldview that some rich, powerful people, through their infinite benevolence, or the C.S. Lewis quote that you put out that my dad quote tweeted, I think this morning. He never does that sort of stuff.
Oh, I didn't see that.
But yeah, but my dad, grew up and had to go through Iran's revolution. Um, so he's very intimately familiar. My mom spent her whole childhood and early years being able to dress how she wanted, become educated. She got a master's degree. And then all that went away because some people who, in their infinite benevolence, were going to make your life better and take care of you, whether you like it or not, and whether they had to kill you to accomplish it. And I've had family members killed by these types of regimes. And, I think the general idea that a small number of people with wealth and power can solve all our problems through their benevolence has only really ever led to ruin. There's probably some examples of it not being the case. But my guess is 8 times out of 10, that's the case. So to me, it again just didn't pass the sniff test. And I do think it began, it also began, I think, with some professor of philosophy or something who wrote a book. And it's just like, okay, this guy had an idea. Good. There's lots of ideas floating around there. I prefer that they come from people who can figure out the math of quantum computation. I'm more likely to buy into your moral and epistemological worldview if you can show me that your thinking is rigorous to the level of inventing quantum computation, versus and then this guy who came up with it ended up being, found out for all sorts of sketchy worldviews and other behaviors. And it's like, oh, what a surprise! And then you look at the list of people who are effective altruism proponents, and the richest ones are in jail now. So, not a great track record. Doesn't pass the sniff test. And I prefer what's beautiful about EAC is there is no organization, there is no leader. The way I think of EAC, and even if you just think of the way it's said, if you yell it, it almost sounds like a battle cry. Everybody is kind of, who's not EAC? You're EAC whether more people are EAC than realize it or claim to be. And to me, it's like a bunch of individual people who are charging forward, trying to make the world better, to do good things. And then because of this battle cry, they're like, oh, there's some other people that are running forward in this battle as well. Isn't that cool? It's not something you have to sign up for. It's not some organization or leader you have to bow down to. It's emergent.
You don't have to put it in your Twitter bio.
Yeah, you don't have to, but it helps.
Yeah.
It's a form of signaling, right?
Exactly. Yes.
It's like cellular signaling, and it's emergent. And I think the things that tend to last the longest are emergent in nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think Beth talks about this often. I think pessimism sells, right? And there's just you never hear the hundreds of thousands of people who land safely in an airplane every single day, because that's not news. But you hear that one plane crash, and then people just panic, and then they don't want to sit in planes the next day. And there's just so much. I think EAC is more focused on combating. I think it's a general universal thing, but it's sort of the culture on Twitter, at least as I see it, is sort of focused on combating the pessimism and the doom in the field of artificial intelligence. But I think it sort of applies everywhere, in terms of having kids, in terms of longevity, the environment. It's sort of you can be a pan optimist, right? You can have you can be optimistic about everything, and it's sort of like a duty to be optimistic, because um, the future is unpredictable, because humans can have an impact on it, and then you can change the trajectory of things if they're bad right now, and anything that's not prohibited by the laws of physics is possible. So you can sort of just change things because you have free will, and you can do amazing things. And so life really is amazing, and knowledge creation is a really powerful thing. And I really like that EAC sort of puts people as these significant entities that can create change in the world and make the world a better place, that I think is lost in like a lot of the sort of the prevailing culture right now.
Well, since we're getting into it, I should just put an EAC pin on. I think just to
just to signal more. Yeah, that's what I'm very
just to just to put a fine point on it, as they say. There we go. Hopefully it's
nice.
not mirrored in it, and it's not a decelerating curve. What do you think about effective altruism?
I think it's better than pure altruism, because again, they have the word effective in front of it, and not just because of words. It's like they are actually trying to solve problems that they think are important, and
well-meaning.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of bad things are well-intentioned, right?
The road to hell,
as you know,
the road to hell is paved with good intentions, as they
for
say.
sure. Yeah, and I think like altruism in general is a really, really bad philosophy. It's like logically, it can't be possible that everybody working on everybody else's problems and trying to solve those other people's problems is a more efficient or a better solution than just people working on their own problems. And I definitely see a place for charity, and I think that's amazing, that people are doing it and like trying to help out other people. But like sort of when you talk about all these things in a sort of moralizing way, where you say, oh, if you don't make all these sacrifices, or if you don't care about like future people who aren't even born yet, the long-termism argument, then you're a bad person, or like we have to sacrifice now to preserve these future generations. I think that's a bad argument, and like for a few different reasons, because like as you know, knowledge creation is unpredictable, and we're not limited to the current resources we have, right? We can always create more resources, because like resources are only limited by the current knowledge that we have. Coal was not a resource until like it was just a rock before we turned it into coal, right? So
yeah, there's no resource without knowledge.
Exactly. So yeah, like I think long-termism is like a few bad, like they make a few bad arguments in I forget the book. I think it was a book by William McCaskill, one of the founders of effective altruism. But yeah, I think like I was also like not really like when I first heard of it, it was like a similar story to yours. I just didn't find it appealing, and it was like all these people talking about wanting to help others out of their generosity, and like yeah, I think like really actually making change, and Per Byland has this brilliant quote that I love. He says that if you want to change things for other people, if you want to change the world without making profits, you just want to change things for other people without their approval. And it's sort of like this, profits, like what profits really are is just proof of serving people. Because if like I pay $5 for my coffee, and like I get a coffee in return. It's like I value the cup of coffee more than I value the $5 I'm giving the barista, and they value the $5 more than the service they're providing me. And so it's like a mutual win-win exchange that I think like a lot of like sort of arguments from altruism don't really don't really understand that, you can create like these win-win exchanges, and it doesn't have to be like one person winning at the expense of somebody else. So yeah, those are sort of my broad points on effective altruism.
Yeah, that's well said. I've always maintained, even since I was like a teenager arguing with my parents, is that you can your action is always selfish. There's no
Yeah,
way to take an action that isn't selfish, because that's not how action is created from the thought to the actual physical movement or choice or decision or behavior that you're engaging in. The question is it only selfish, or does it also help others and move things forward? And so I think the example that you provided is an example of where somebody is being selfish. I'm selling a drink for more than it costs me to make, and the other person is also benefiting. And again, our language always betrays us, because often when, and this is me as a teenager arguing with my parents who are like, well, I want you to come home at this time because I don't want something to happen to you. And, my point to them then, my whole life growing up, even when I was 5 years old, everyone called me a little lawyer. So I'm like, listen to your words. The literal first words out of your mouth are, I don't want. You're making a statement about me based on your wants.
yeah,
And that's okay, but this is a selfish thing, and that's
right.
also okay. But it's not so much about me. It's not 100% about me, is it?
Yeah,
It's also about you, and your own words betray you, because you literally say, I don't want you to get hurt. I want you to be healthy. I'm the second part of the statement. You're the first part of
right.
the statement. So what is the priority? What are your priorities? They're actually yourself, and that's okay. And so I
And
don't know
again,
why people get into this.
these come from such great intentions, right? Like even love, right? Like this is a form of love. Like they want you to be safe, they want you protected. Like I love you. It's like I selfishly love you. And so I mean, we could call it whatever we want, but like it's also interesting that the people who argue most for you to sacrifice on something, they're coming from like a place that they want to control you from, and it's like that's more selfish than anything else. It's like you want to, you want me to be a certain way, and you and you want me to sacrifice, and you want me to live life in a certain way. I think like that's more selfish, quote unquote, than anything else.
It would be easier to believe if it was coming from somebody who was poor and living in squalor, saying maybe we should sacrifice. But often it's coming from people who have the most of everything.
Yeah,
They have private jets. They have many homes. They have servants galore. While espousing the idea that we all need to cut back on our consumption. People are, smart enough to know when something passes the sniff test, and a lot of it doesn't. And we didn't get this far. Just like people are talking about AI safety, the same arguments were made against letting people learn to read and write. In many parts of the world throughout history, it was illegal to teach people to read and write unless you were a member of the clergy or royalty. And the argument was the safety of the people, that we have to keep people from learning to read and write. Then the printing press came along, and in many parts of the world throughout history, it was illegal to own and operate a printing press. Because for the safety of the people, we needed to make sure that the wrong type of information didn't get out there. And can you argue that we go back to a world where nobody can learn to read and write and the printing press is illegal? It's I can't remember which sci-fi author wrote that, every technology, made after you were born as technology, but like if it was before you were born, it's just like a part of reality. Like people don't think of plumbing as technology. It's technology. Written language itself is a technology we invented.
Yeah.
Right. But we don't tend to think of them as technologies. And so we're not sitting here trying to regulate whether or not people can learn to read and write, because that's not a technology to be regulated. That's just something inherent of what you get for being alive. We have to regulate everything that's coming up because this is technology. And it just doesn't pass the sniff test. It doesn't make sense in the context of the reality that we live in. Controlling information is, information to me wants to be free. It has this weird desire to be free and not be bound. It tries to get out, like life itself. It wants to perpetuate itself. And I guess it's some sort of self-fulfilling, because the information that lasts has successfully self-perpetuated. But real knowledge wants to keep going.
Sure. Yeah. Exactly. And there's this meme that you are the general intelligence they want to align, and that's sort of been the case historically. So switching gears a little bit, I thought we could talk about. You've experimented with so many different things for your health. What tips do you have for the average person to get started with biohacking and optimizing their longevity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll go back to macrobiotics, a view that they have in macrobiotics, which is sometimes it's easier to add the good things than focus on getting rid of the bad things. And this might be a little contrary to what Brian Johnson says, but maybe not. I may be misunderstanding. I'll give an example. When you start eating healthy and you start feeling better, you want to continue to feel that way. And so it becomes easier to stop doing the bad things when you start adding some of the good things. Maybe this doesn't work for you. Maybe you're the type of person that just has to cut out the bad things, hard, full stop, cold turkey, or you won't be able to continue. One of the biggest tenets in macrobiotics is do what works. And you're an individual. So do what works for you. And if some protocol or some pattern isn't working, try a different one. So the most effective things that you're going to be able to do is, cutting down or cutting out the drinking, obviously cutting out smoking, then getting good sleep. The basis of all this stuff is diet and exercise. I was explaining to a friend the other day who doesn't like to cook. And I'm like, well, maybe you can look at it a little bit differently. Like, maybe you can just make some hard-boiled eggs. It's pretty simple. You can't really screw it up. They'll last for a few days. And if you think about it, that egg is you before it's you. You are literally only made out of the things that you put in your mouth. You're not like spontaneously creating atoms inside yourself out of nothingness, right? You're literally made out of the things you eat. So that egg or that steak, it's you before it's you, right? So think of it that way. It's about you, that you're making yourself with the things that you eat. So that's the absolute basis of everything, is what you're eating, because that's what you're literally made out of. You eat a McDonald's hamburger, your heart is made out of McDonald's hamburger. So diet being, the first and foremost thing, exercise, right? The second thing, and in exercise, resistance training in particular, I think we've found is super powerful. I'm not big on, maybe you won't like the sound of this. I'm not big on a lot of like long distance running. I think it's, pretty inflammatory to the body. And when you're 17 years old, it may be easy to recover from. But in general, I don't actually think that stuff is that healthy. I had a good friend of mine who's like who used to be an ultra marathoner. Like, he's like 75-mile marathons, right? And this guy would go run barefoot up a mountain for 20 miles to clear his head. Okay, total nut job. And I would talk to him about it, and he's like, yeah, no, it's just a form of of self-harm. I have
Ex-
no
yeah.
compunction that it's good for me. I know it's bad for me. I just do, and he doesn't do it anymore. But and I also don't think lifting super heavy a lot is really a long-term smart strategy. But resistance training we've shown to be extremely beneficial. I think sauna is one of the biggest bang for your buck things that you can do. It does a bunch of things, from being a good cardiovascular workout, to generating heat shock proteins that are incredibly powerful at basically fixing malformed proteins, helping fix your DNA. And you're just sitting in a room.
Yeah.
This morning I was reading Why We Die, a new book that came out today, on aging and longevity. I was reading it in the sauna, so I'm fighting the dying while reading and learning more about not dying. So how can you be more compounding than that? So I think saunas is super helpful. So diet, resistance training, simple things like sauna. I think there are getting some basic baseline tests of like vitamin D, magnesium. Those are hugely helpful to make sure that you're not running a nutritional deficiency for decades of your life. So, cut out the bad stuff and start with the basics. And then you can start, playing around if you want with peptides or enclomiphene and some of the, I wouldn't start with those things. You should take care of the basics first. I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm happy to
Yeah, totally.
keep going.
About the long distance running stuff, it's sort of similar to me too. I don't think it's actually that good for my body, at least like the really long stuff, right?
Yeah.
I mean, shorter distances, like 3 to 5 times a week, I think that's fine. But like,
Yeah,
especially
yeah.
like longer
And if you're
distances,
recovering from it too,
yeah,
if you're
right.
getting recovery, and it's
Mhm.
just pounding pavement for 15 miles every single day, that's
Oh
different.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that just might be damaging, but I sort of do it for the fun, or to sort of clear my head sometimes too. But I think you're a big fan of mobility and flexibility too. So maybe you want to talk about that.
Sure. Yeah. That's a huge one. I mean, if you can't do an ass to the ground squat with a straight back, you're not going to make it. Okay. Uh, and I say that because that is not an advanced move, but most people can't do it. And so you got to check in on your mobility, because so one of the things, here's the thing, another big thing I'm big on is your fascia. So your fascia basically covers every organ, the muscles, the bones in your body, and it basically defines your shape. Okay. Also, a lot of your proprioception, your spatial proprioception, is in the innervation of your fascia. So fascia needs it, part of what fascia, so like your body likes to stick to itself internally, because it's all compressed against each other, right? There's not a ton of huge open cavities. Like the organs are pressing against each other, they're pressing against the muscle, against the bone. Everything's pretty compact in there, and because of the way cellular biology works, these things kind of want to like grow into each other. Okay. And so part of what your fascia does is keep your organs and your muscles and your bones from actually like sticking to each other over time. But your fascia can do that as well. And so over time, if you're not maintaining the mobility of your fascia, you're literally going to get stuck together. And when you're stuck together, you're not going to come apart. So if you look at people who've been doing yoga for decades, they're 80 years old, their back is straight. I mean, think about it this way. Your bones are about 50% or so protein and collagen. They're not rocks. They're more like clay. So either you shape your bones or gravity will shape them for you. Okay? And you have to undo the effect of gravity on your bones and being sedentary and having a lack of mobility. So when you take your bones into account, your fascia into account, if you don't have the fascial mobility, you're going to keep losing it. So ass to the ground squat, right? Can you like sit with, just stand with your back against the wall, with the back of your head against the wall and your shoulder blades against the wall, and stand there comfortably for 30 seconds? A lot of people can't because they're already kind of like hunching over like this. And your bones are literally going to grow in that direction. There's a really good book. I think I always kind of screw up the name. I think it's Move Your Genes. By this woman, I'm forgetting her name, but she basically shows that, epigenetically speaking, every movement you make is affecting your epigenetics, right? And so, for example, your body, if you wear high heels all the time, over time, the cells in the back of your leg are actually going to become shorter. So your movement is affecting how your body is literally made. So if you are conscious of this, then you can make yourself in the way you want. Maybe you want shorter cells in the back of your legs. That's none of my business. Wear heels all the time if you do, but just understand that it's going to have an effect. And not doing things is going to have an effect. And you don't want to be old and stuck together. Keep that fascial, mobility there. Be able to do the basic stuff. One of the tests that they do, and this kind of really only I think applies to maybe people 65 or older. It's a simple test where you sort of sit down and you cross your legs as you sit, and then you stand up. And you don't, and the goal is to not use your hands and not use your balance, and they kind of score you on it. And it's one of the strong predictors of life expectancy after a certain age. Is they can basically correlate your mobility to how much longer you're going to live.
Yeah, I know a lot of people under 65 who can't do that. So
yeah, that's absolutely the case. And another thing they tend to see is that once you lose your mobility and you're in a wheelchair or you're stuck to a bed, it is just a rapid decline from there. Movement is required for the metabolic processes that your body does. Without the movement, a whole bunch of metabolic processes start changing and start not occurring, digestion, all these things, because they're all signaling, right? Your body is a massive signaling system.
Yeah.
So yeah, I could, as you can see, I can rant about flexibility and mobility on demand.
Yeah, I love that. You're a big Steve Jobs fan, and I think you've studied him and his work in quite some depth. Could you share any lessons from Steve that have significantly influenced the trajectory of your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I love to geek out about this. So I think, there are, if I had to sum life down to a couple of quotes and pieces of advice that I think are all you need, two of them are basically like complimentary quotes. One is from Steve Jobs, and its complement is Dostoevsky. So Dostoevsky's famous quotation, I believe, is, your greatest sin is that you betrayed yourself for nothing. Okay? And it's the negative version of the Steve Jobs quote. And there's many great Steve Jobs quotations, and many famous ones. And obviously one of his most famous is his Stanford speech, right? But I think the most important thing he says in that Stanford speech is like the one that people kind of don't really like, they gloss over it because it's kind of tough to understand it. And I don't even claim to think that I even really understand it, but like, I get that there's something there, and I'm always trying to get to the point where I feel like I understand it in the way that it seems like he really does understand it when he's saying it. And he's saying it in a way where he's like, I know you don't understand it, and I know that you're not going to understand it, but I'm going to tell you anyways. And it's the compliment to your greatest sin is that you betrayed yourself for nothing, is when he says to follow your heart, because in the end, it always knew what you wanted to become. and I think, and you hear it and you're like, okay, cool, whatever. Nice
Yeah.
quote, buddy. But it doesn't hit as hard. But the thing is, I know that when you listen to him say it, you can tell that he's like, no, no, this is the one thing he wants you to get out of it. And it's the one thing that doesn't seem to hit that hard. So clearly I'm missing something, right? Because there's this big daylight between how hard it hit me and how hard he's clearly trying to get you to understand. Just do this one thing, follow your heart. It knows what you truly want to become. And I think everybody's got that nagging in the back of their head of like, I always knew this is what I really should become, but I'm not really doing it fully. And I think that's what he did, to great detriment, maybe to the detriment of his own life. Was to actually follow his heart. No matter what pain it brought and difficulties it brought, he just kept going back to, I'm going to follow my heart on this. And I don't know if you get how it's this counterpoint to this,
Yeah.
your greatest sin is that you betrayed yourself for nothing
Right.
because you didn't follow your heart. And what did you get for it? You got nothing.
Yeah.
Right? You end up dead anyways, right? You leave this world with nothing at some point. Maybe it's in 1,500 years because your spaceship, didn't dock into like some, spaceport on the other side of the galaxy effectively, or the Klingons got you. I don't know. But in the end, you have nothing. So why did you betray yourself? Why didn't you follow your heart? And then I think the other edge of the picture for me on advice is, and lots of people have said this, I think Sama says this really well. He's like, I realized that whenever I got what I wanted, it's because I didn't follow people's advice. Yeah. And if you think about it, that also complements the other points because it's follow your heart.
Right. Stop
following other people's advice, So yeah, I could go on about Steve Jobs forever. He's really I actually get teary-eyed sometimes when I start talking about him. Yeah, he's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's amazing, and it definitely helps with the compliment quotes that you mentioned. But one of the, I love the Stanford one, but I think like the other one that's really popular, or at least one that I really love, is like him talking about the secrets of life. I think it was like the Santa Clara Valley Association or something, and he was basically, I don't know the exact quote because it was like a long 2-minute video, but it's like one of the best YouTube videos that like I watch from time to time, and he's basically talking about how like everything around you is made by people no different from you, and like the world is a highly malleable place, and you can like you can just go out and like do these things. You don't have to like do whatever the conventional norm is, like raise a family and like have kids, save pension, and do all that stuff. You can just have an impact on the world, and that was like really, really powerful when I first saw that video, and even like when I see the video now, it's he was definitely.
I know exactly which one you're talking about. Yeah, I can picture it in my head. It's kind of like a low res video too, and he's got like I think like a blue dress shirt on, and it's a great one. And I think it's like you don't have to do those things, but don't not do them because you think you can't. Is that kind of the point I think he's making? I mean, do what you want, but like don't not go and change the world because you think it's not malleable. And I think Mark Andreessen says this a lot too, is that the world is remarkably malleable. You can bend it to your will. So don't not go for it because you think you can't. You absolutely can. That's another really good one.
Oh, Farbood, I think that's a good place to end today's conversation. Thank you so much for joining me. As I said at the beginning,
my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I really admire what you're doing, and I really appreciate that you spent your time with me. I know you're actively documenting your journey on X, so I'll link your Twitter handle in the episode description. Is there anywhere else people can find you and learn more about what you're doing?
X is a good spot for now. I'm gonna keep sharing vociferously on X, it's really cool. People reach out to me almost daily in the DMs. I've talked to like several people with muscular wasting issues who are looking into Follistatin. One guy's got a 5-year-old son that he got the Follistatin gene therapy for. He just wanted to talk to somebody about it because he can't talk to his 5-year-old son about it. And so, it really means a lot to me that people are reaching out and chatting with me about it. So I'm going to keep sharing there for sure. And we've got some cool things coming out here in the near future to help people do some of this stuff for themselves.
Incredible. Oh, thanks again for joining me.